Let me ask you something. What would you do if you woke up at 3 a.m. and your phone started recording by itself? Don't answer yet. Just listen and imagine it's happening to you. The coat in the corner. I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's sort of an all-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom commented on my Instagram story asking when I was leaving, and I said, "Today." He told me he lived an hour outside of Austin, which was actually in the direction home for me. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He said I should stop by, and I said, sure, why not? I set my GPS for Tom's address, and it said about an hour-and-a-half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but lost touch after graduation. We followed each other on social media, but hadn't really spoken in years. When I pulled up, I noticed his house was a little old-fashioned. It wasn't run down or anything, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my steps, and when he opened the door, I caught the scent of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was, of course, very welcoming, giving me a big hug and pulling me inside. Some friendships stay just as pure no matter how much time passes. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been around since the 70s, and every step I took on the hardwood floors let out a small creak. It felt kind of Texas, I guess. It was charming in a way, like stepping back in time. We sat down in his living room, catching up on life and drinking whiskey. It was about 5 p.m. by this point. One drink turned into two into three, and before I knew it, I was pretty drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes. We were having such a good time catching up that eventually he dropped the question I knew he'd ask. "Hey man, you got a long drive back. Why don't you crash here for the night?" he offered. I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to be on the road. I said, "Yeah, good idea," and asked if I'd take the couch we were on. And then he said, "Nah, I got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch." That was good enough for me. We ate some Chinese food that we had delivered, and after a while, he led me down a short hallway to the spare bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the inside of the room because I was hammered. We both were. But I remember the air in the room was still, like it hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register my surroundings before I collapsed onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark except for a little bit of moonlight sneaking in through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, there was something hanging. At first, it looked like a long black trench coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape of it felt wrong. It had a broad upper portion, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung made it look less like fabric and more like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into bed, but I had been drunk. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It was just a coat, nothing more, but I couldn't help myself. I peeked again. Still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up again. It wasn't just discomfort that pulled me from sleep. It was sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone stepping carefully on an old wooden floor. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now, dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner, and my stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast that my head spun, my body buzzing with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, my heart thudding against my ribs. There was nothing in the corner, just an empty closet door. I threw the covers off and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming through me. I shook him awake, which took a lot of effort considering how drunk he'd been. He finally woke up, rubbing his eyes in confusion. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the coat rack in the spare room." He squinted at me, confused. "What coat?" he said. "The black trench coat, the one that was hanging on the closet door." It looked like a person almost. Tom sat up, more awake now. "I don't own a trench coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room," he said. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say he was messing with me, but his expression stayed serious. "Come look," I said. He sighed but got up and followed me back to the spare bedroom. I pointed to the exact spot. "It was right there," I said. Tom scratched his head and asked if I was sure I wasn't just dreaming, but I shook my head, my voice trembling slightly. "I know what I saw. I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again, and it was gone." We stood in the room for a few moments, both of us feeling the same eerie silence pressing in on us. Tom finally exhaled and shook his head, agreeing we should check the house just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no weird coats hanging anywhere, nothing that could explain what I saw. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me that maybe I'd been in some kind of half-dream state, seeing things that weren't there. I wanted to believe that. Really, I did. I didn't want to think about the alternative. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him alone after that. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-like figure staring at me from the corner and the way it was just gone in the morning. Maybe Tom played a cruel prank on me, but to this day he's never admitted to anything, so I doubt that. Or maybe, just maybe, there had been someone in that house watching me sleep, and they decided to leave before the morning came. The forest campsite. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, whom we can call Anna. The story takes place in Sweden during a road trip. My parents, Anna and I, were traveling domestically, with an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was to visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we hadn't booked one in advance. When we arrived in the city where the theme park was located, it was already late, and since we planned to visit the park the next day, we needed a place to sleep. We had brought tents in the car, so my dad searched online for a nearby campsite. He found one that looked good and close by, so he called, but unfortunately, that day coincided with a big soccer tournament, and the campsite was fully booked. Because we hadn't reserved a spot, there was no space left for us. My dad called around to other places, but we couldn't find any that were both nearby and reasonably priced. Our only option was to find a camping spot out in nature. We set the GPS to the nearest parking area in a forest to avoid parking fines. Eventually, we found a spot in a nature reserve. When we arrived, there were some people around, so we asked if it was okay to set up our tents there and whether it was safe. A woman who was hiking told us it was a good place to stay and that there were no parking attendants. Based on that, we decided to camp in a small, lonely gravel parking lot surrounded by forest, about a 10-minute walk from a beach. At first, we considered setting up our tents on the beach, but something told me it would be better to camp near the car. As we got out to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lone car parked further away in the lot. It looked old and in poor condition, and there was no one inside. I found it strange because it was already evening, and there were no more people around the beach or the forest. Still, I didn't think too much about it at the time. I helped my parents pitch the tents. They would sleep in one, while Anna and I shared the other, both placed close together. After some struggling, we finally finished. Anna and I made our tent cozy, watched YouTube, and ate snacks. By then, it was around 11 p.m. We wanted to sleep soon so we wouldn't be too tired the next day. After a while, around midnight, we decided to sleep. My parents were already asleep in their tent. Anna and I were scrolling through TikTok when we suddenly heard a metallic sound from the parking lot. like a shovel hitting the gravel. We both froze, startled, and looked at each other in fear. Too scared to peek outside, we stayed silent and listened. The sound had come from the same direction as the abandoned car. Then we heard what sounded like the shovel being tossed into a car trunk, followed by the trunk slamming shut. We sat in silence, our hearts pounding. Moments later, we heard the car speed off, tires crunching over the gravel, fading into the distance. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend from a nearby city, telling him where we were camping. He replied quickly, warning me that the beach nearby was known to be dangerous, that organized criminals often did illegal things there. We had no idea. When I read that message, I felt cold all over. About 10 minutes passed after the car drove away. Anna and I had started to calm down a little when, out of nowhere, we heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream, a man's scream, coming from deep in the woods. We were absolutely horrified. I immediately texted my mom, telling her we just heard someone scream. When she didn't respond, I called her to wake her up. She finally answered, groggy, and said neither she nor my dad had heard anything. She reassured me it was probably nothing serious, but I couldn't think of any normal reason for someone to scream like that. Anna and I crawled under the blankets, trembling, not knowing what was happening. Every minute felt like an hour. Even though it was midnight, we were too scared to sleep. Then, suddenly, everything went eerily silent, and my blood ran cold. I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around our tents, moving stealthily. Anna and I sat up, frozen in fear. I put my phone down so its light wouldn't give us away. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my own pulse. There was no logical reason for anyone to be walking around our tents in the middle of the forest at that hour. The footsteps circled our tent first, then moved toward my parents' tent, and then around our car, which was parked nearby. The person stopped and seemed to be standing there, just watching. For a moment, everything went completely silent. Then I heard the same car from earlier returning. Its headlights swept across our tents, flooding the fabric with pale light. Anna and I quickly lay flat, pretending to be asleep. I gathered the courage to peek through the small window of our tent. I saw the car door slam shut, then the vehicle sped off again into the dark. For a brief moment, I felt relief that the person had left. From my vantage point, I could see the narrow forest road it disappeared down. 5 minutes later, another set of headlights appeared, a police car racing in the same direction the other car had gone. Nothing else happened after that. Still trembling, Anna and I decided to sit in the locked car to feel safer. I stayed awake until around 5 in the morning, keeping watch over the quiet forest, while Anna eventually fell asleep beside me. After about an hour, sheer exhaustion pulled me back to the tent, and we both finally drifted off. We woke up around 9, completely drained. I told my mom everything that had happened, and she revealed that she had also heard the footsteps, and even heavy breathing, like the kind you hear in horror movies just before something terrible happens. She had been terrified too. My dad, on the other hand, had slept through the entire night, so we had to fill him in. Without hesitation, we packed our things in the tents as fast as we could, eager to leave that place behind. None of us wanted to stay a second longer. Despite the terrifying night, we still managed to enjoy the theme park later that day. But that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to look up the forest where we had camped. What I found made my stomach drop. Just a short time before our visit, a man had been murdered there, stabbed to death in a gang-related attack. Even more disturbing, 2 men had gone missing from that exact same beach and were never found. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the person walking around our tents that night had been one of them? Or someone responsible? What if we had been in real danger and didn't even realize it? Even now, I still think about that night. The blood-curdling scream, the sound of the shovel in the dark, the heavy breathing outside our tent, and the police car tearing through the forest road. Who screamed in the woods? Who was using a shovel in the middle of the night? And what exactly were the police chasing? I guess I'll never know. Mom's voice at midnight. This is a story that still haunts me when I think about it, even though I was so young when it happened. 6 is around the age when my childhood memories start to become clear. I have one sibling, my older brother Keith. He's 2 years older than me, so at the time he was 8. When I was 6, I had a strict bedtime, 8:30. If I didn't follow it, or if our dad caught either of us awake past that hour, we'd be in serious trouble. Our dad was always strict with us as kids. I don't remember if this happened on a school night or not, but I woke up in the middle of the night to Keith shaking me awake. We shared a big bedroom upstairs in the house, while our parents' room was on the first floor. I was confused until Keith whispered for me to be quiet and listen. And then I heard it too. It was our mom's voice, softly calling our names from downstairs. Her tone was strange, low, whispery, almost like she didn't want to wake anyone else. I was about to get up to answer her, but Keith stopped me. He whispered, "Don't. I don't think that's Mom." I remember getting angry at him, thinking he was trying to scare me. He told me to go closer and listen. So I got up and went to the bedroom door. Just outside was a small hallway leading to the bathroom and another bedroom where our grandma stayed whenever she visited. Directly to the right of our door was the stairway to the first floor. It had its own door too. I pressed my ear against it and heard the voice clearer this time. "Keith. Mikey." It sounded exactly like our mom. "That's Mom," I said. "No, it's not," Keith replied. Somehow, even as the younger one, I found myself being the one brave, or foolish, enough to unlock the door. I slowly pulled it open, careful not to make a sound, but just as I did, the voice stopped. I whispered to Keith that Mom must have walked away. Again, he said, "That's not Mom." I told him to shut up because he was scaring me. I turned the stairway door handle and opened it just a little, just enough to peek through. At the bottom of the stairs, in the dim light, I saw the silhouette of a woman. For a split second, I thought it was Mom. But then, deep down, I knew it wasn't. She looked up at me. She saw me, and in a soft, sweet voice, she said, "Hi, sweetie, come down." My body froze. Then I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran back into our room, locking that door too. I started crying, and Keith just kept saying, "I told you." We both agreed to start screaming to wake our parents. On the count of 3, we stomped on the floor and screamed as loud as we could. Within seconds, our parents came rushing upstairs, pounding on the locked door. At first, Dad was furious about the lock, but when they saw I was crying and Keith was pale with fear, they knew something was wrong. We told them everything. Mom's face went pale. She said she hadn't called for us. She hadn't even been upstairs. She asked what the woman looked like, but all we could say was that she was standing in the dark, that she looked like Mom at first. Dad immediately ran downstairs to check the house. After a few tense minutes, Mom hugged us and told us to lock the doors. Something she had never said before. I was too young to understand, but it felt like our parents already had an idea who it might have been. A little while later, we heard the doorbell ring. Keith and I looked out the window and saw a police car in the driveway. We wanted to go downstairs, but we stayed in our room. Later, our parents told us they didn't know who it was, that it must have been a random intruder. But even back then, I could tell they were hiding something. They kept saying they were proud of us for not going downstairs, for staying put. Now, as an adult, I still wonder, because the last time I brought it up at dinner, they brushed it off again, just like they always did. Said it must have been some stranger, but that never explained how that woman, whoever she was, knew our names. The Woman in the Closet. My name is Garrett, and this took place when I was a sophomore in college. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a 3-house community that was sort of near campus, but not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. Plus, I had a bike, so I didn't really mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were young students like me, but there were a few exceptions. Some alumni, 1 or 2 TAs, and a few older people getting their degrees later in life. But the person who immediately stood out to me was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. From what I could tell, she was maybe in her late 50s, though she looked a little older. She had graying hair and walked with a limp, like she had some kind of back injury. She was very quiet and mostly kept to herself, always with this blank expression on her face. I assumed she had some kind of connection to the university, maybe faculty, maybe alumni. But no one explained, and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our common kitchen, which was weird to begin with because the other 2 houses had their own kitchens, so I wasn't sure why she'd be hanging out in ours. She wasn't cooking or eating or talking to anyone. She was just standing there while the rest of us were running around making dinner and listening to music. She didn't try to join in, she just watched us blankly. I caught eyes with her a few times, and part of me felt like she was watching me specifically, even though I knew that was probably just in my head. No one else acknowledged her, which I thought was weird too. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, I was doing homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my bedroom window, and there she was, staring up at me, as if that wasn't strange enough. She wasn't even on the sidewalk, she was standing in the middle of the street. It was getting late, and pretty cold too, so she must have been freezing out there. I couldn't tell if she was looking directly into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but I got the feeling she was staring right at me. I don't know why I did it, but I waved at her, trying to be friendly. The moment I did, I regretted it instantly. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down a few times like she was excited, then ran toward one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt sick. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I'd confirmed that she had been looking into my room the entire time. And even if she hadn't, she now knew exactly which room was mine. Later that night, I asked one of my housemates about her. He told me that the woman had always been there, and that I should just ignore her like the rest of them did. I pressed for more, but he said he didn't know anything, just what someone else had told him when he moved in. It didn't sit right with me, so I kept asking around until I finally got some kind of answer. One of the seniors who lived in her house told me she was associated with the university and was a little kooky, but that she didn't have a history of violence or ever getting physical. I asked him why no one else seemed to find it as strange as I did, and he said they really couldn't control who lived there. That decision was up to the property manager. I wasn't fully satisfied with that answer, but there was nothing I could do, so I tried to just block her out of my mind. But then it got worse. One night, I walked out of my room and nearly ran into her. She was in the hallway, standing right in front of my door. I literally jumped back because she caught me so off guard. It was past midnight on like a Tuesday, so the house was mostly dead. She didn't say anything when she saw me. She barely even reacted. Instead, she just turned and walked away, as if I were the one who had intruded on her. I'm not going to go into every little detail, but there were several more occurrences like that one where I caught her either snooping somewhere where she had no business being or doing something she had no business doing. At some point, I lost my room key. All 3 houses had once been part of the same hotel, so all the rooms had personal locks and keys. It was a co-op, so most people just left their doors unlocked. But I was someone who couldn't sleep comfortably knowing someone could just walk into my room, so losing my key was a big deal. Everyone had a spare, including me, but I was pissed because I'd have to go make a copy of the key, and that was an extra annoyance I couldn't afford at the time. A few nights later, I woke up randomly in the night. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it. There was a soft bumping coming from my closet every 20 seconds or so. It sounded like something shifting behind the door, like something was moving inside of my closet. I'm not one to scare easily, and I'm definitely not one to be helpless in a dangerous situation, so I was going to deal with this myself. I quietly got out of bed and took a deep breath. I slowly walked over to the closet, trying to keep my breathing under control. My heart was racing. In one fluid motion, I ripped the closet door open and screamed like a crazy person. Just as I expected, the woman was in there. She had one of my ties wrapped around her neck, and her eyes were wide open. She was holding a kitchen knife with her other hand. My scream must have startled her, because before I could react, she lunged at me with the knife outstretched. I screamed again, only this one wasn't pretend. It was a scream of pure fear. I wrestled her to the ground and was able to disarm her pretty easily, given how frail and small she was. That didn't make the situation any less terrifying, though. She kicked and fought and bit as I pinned her to the ground, screaming the whole time. I yelled for help, and I heard some doors slam, followed by some of my housemates running down the hall. My friend Lee immediately helped me immobilize the woman, and the two of us kept her pinned while someone else called the police. The rest of the night was a blur. The police got there quickly and arrested her on the spot. By that point, she had stopped screaming, but she refused to say anything either, which was extremely unsettling. The cops found my room key on her. Real big shocker there. A few weeks later, we got our answer about who she was. Apparently, she was the property manager's sister who he had been letting live there under the radar. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her proper care, he had just thrown her into one of the unoccupied rooms. I believe the property manager was eventually arrested for negligence and a slew of other things. And rightfully so. I honestly blame him so much more for what happened than her. If anything, I feel bad for her, but my pity won't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I could have lost my life that night. I have no idea why she seemed so interested in me specifically, but I can only hope nothing like that ever happens to me again. I'm graduating soon, and I'm definitely going to miss college, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look back on my time here without thinking about that night. The man who followed me home. This happened when I was 16. I was still in high school and obviously didn't have a car yet, so I was at the mercy of my parents driving me around or just walking if it was close. It was the weekend, and my friend Haley was having some of our friends over since her parents weren't home. My mom drove me to her house. Haley lived close, about a 3-minute drive or a 20-minute walk. My mom was single at the time, and she also liked to go out, so she told me that if she was out late, I should just walk or get a ride home, which meant she was going on a date. A few of our girlfriends were at Haley's house, Tina, Courtney, and Belle. The 5 of us hung out in her backyard for a few hours until some boys from our school unexpectedly showed up. By unexpectedly, I mean Haley didn't tell me she was inviting them. The reason I was annoyed was because one of the boys that showed up was a boy I had some annoying history with and didn't really want to see. Haley thought she was being cute and sneaky by inviting him there without telling me, because for some reason she wanted him and me to work things out. It was just an awkward mess. There were 4 boys and 5 girls including me, so eventually I decided I wasn't really feeling it. After a while, I left. I'm sure some of the others started to leave shortly after because it was already late, but I just didn't want to be around those boys. I made sure to let Haley know how pissed off I was over text as I was walking home, and she kept saying, "OMG, come back." She apologized, and I forgave her, but I still just wanted to go home. I walked for about 5 minutes until I slowed down. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, and when I slowed down, I confirmed they weren't mine. I turned around and saw a middle-aged man with a hood up over his head and his hands in his hoodie pocket. He was smiling, looking at me and said, "How you doing?" I responded, "Hi," and just turned and kept walking. We were in the suburbs. People walk around. It's not unheard of, even if it was late. 5 more minutes passed, and every time I glanced around, that man was still behind me, more or less the same distance away, maybe a little closer each time I looked. It wasn't a straight path home. I had to make multiple turns onto intersecting roads to get to my house, and each turn I made, he was still there. I was texting my friends about it, and then the man from behind me said, "Isn't it such a nice night? Love this weather." I replied, "Yeah," and that was it. I started walking just a bit faster, but not enough to make it obvious that I was running away. The man spoke again, and every time he opened his mouth, part of me died a little more inside. Why was he talking to me? Why was he following me? He asked, "Are you from the neighborhood?" I replied, "No," keeping my answers short and firm. The man chuckled. I started asking all my friends for help, to send one of the guys to come pick me up. Ironically, the boy I was trying to avoid was on his way to get me. I'll just nickname him Brandon. The man behind me then said something that changed everything. He said, "I'm not going to hurt you. You live by the elementary school, right?" I turned around and he stopped in his tracks. He was still smiling, but now his smile seemed more disingenuous, more sinister. I screamed, "Leave me alone," and started to run. I heard the man running behind me, catching up fast. At that point, it was my life on the line. So I started screaming bloody murder, yelling for help so everyone in their houses would wake up and hear me. The man dropped his nice guy facade and shouted, "Shut up, you little bitch." My screams must have scared him off because he obviously didn't want a bunch of witnesses coming out of their homes. He ran away into the darkness, and I saw lights turning on in the houses around me. One couple came out of their house, and I explained that I had almost been kidnapped. I stayed there in front of their house until Brandon arrived to pick me up. He drove me home. It was only about a 1-minute drive after that. My mom wasn't home. She was out and wasn't answering my texts. I didn't want to be alone, so I invited Brandon in to stay the night. I know he was the happiest camper alive. But it didn't end there. We were up late just talking and reminiscing about old times when we both heard footsteps circling the house. My room in that house was upstairs facing the backyard. We heard the gate to the backyard opening. My mom would never come in through the backyard, so something was definitely off. I held back from yelling out, "Mom!" and instead, Brandon and I just looked out the window, watching. We didn't hear any more sounds. We were expecting to see someone walking around the yard, but instead, we both heard a man's voice say, "I see you up there." I let out an audible gasp and stepped away from the window. Brandon yelled something like, "We're calling the cops, you pussy freak." And that's exactly what we did. The fact that this man knew where I lived, and probably knew who I was, terrified me. What if he had known I was going to Haley's house? Brandon did most of the talking on the phone with 911. Looking back, I know he tried really hard to be the man in this situation, and I appreciated that. I was honestly so glad he came inside. The cops showed up, and their presence made me feel safer. Even just giving them a description of the man made me feel better, like at least something was being done. My mom got home soon after, and she was just as freaked out as I was. They kept a police car parked on our block for a few hours as a deterrent, thankfully. From then on, I didn't walk anywhere at night. I was even scared to go into our backyard after that. My mom had my uncle come over and install an entire security camera system. He made no effort to hide them. They were on full display to deter that creepy man and any other creep from coming near the house. I'm glad to say the story ended there, because that incident also prompted my mom to sell that house about a year later, just because she hated seeing me live in constant fear there. We never found out who that man was. The girl across the street. This isn't really my story, but I essentially watched the whole thing happen, so I'm telling it anyway. I've lived in a modest 2-story home with my husband, Benjamin, for the better part of 20 years now. All of our kids are out living their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. Someone had just moved into the house across the street, which was really nice because I was getting sick of looking out at a vacant house all the time. I'm retired, so I spend a lot of time on my front porch, knitting, reading, enjoying the weather with my husband, you name it. I also listen to a lot of true crime podcasts out there, and sometimes I'll just play music. The person who moved into the house across the street was a young guy, maybe mid-20s. He drove an expensive-looking BMW and always dressed in flashy clothing, so I figured he was either well off or seriously pretending. I hope I'm not giving the wrong impression about him. He was actually really sweet. He introduced himself to us after a few days. His name was Quinn, and he was a few years out of college, just like I had guessed. He was a really bright guy and got along well with Benjamin. They laughed and talked about sports, and Benjamin even shared a few of his old college stories that I hadn't heard in years. Quinn said he worked in the entertainment industry and did freelance work for some internet personality, whatever that means. It kind of went over my head, but it must have been lucrative. He looked pretty wealthy, like I said. He talked about stocks with Benjamin and told us about some of the investments he was making. All in all, he seemed like a nice guy. Things were normal for a few months. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on my porch, so Quinn would often wave to me when leaving his house, and I always waved back. I can't remember exactly when, but I started noticing the same girl going over to Quinn's house every so often. She drove a little white convertible, and she was pretty. Young, blonde, the type of girl you'd expect a guy like him to date. To be frank, she dressed a bit scandalously, which I didn't fully appreciate. I figured she was his girlfriend, maybe checking on the house while he was out. She had her own house key, so it made sense. It became a regular thing. Once, maybe twice a week, I'd see that car roll up while Quinn was gone. She'd go inside, stay for a while, then leave. I didn't really understand what she was doing, but young people date differently these days, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Then, one evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat. That confirmed it. She was his girlfriend, just as I had assumed. But shortly after that day, things started getting tense, or at least that's what it seemed like. One afternoon, I was out tending to my little garden when I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and the girl were standing in the driveway, yelling at each other. I couldn't catch what they were arguing about, but I didn't need to. She kept throwing her hands in the air, practically spitting her words at him. It looked like she was going to strike him. Eventually, she got in the car, slammed the door, and tore off down the road. Quinn shook his head and went back inside. I don't even think he noticed me. I figured it was a lover's spat. Every couple fights, and it wasn't my place to butt in where I wasn't welcome. But then, I saw that girl's car in front of his house again when he wasn't home. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. I told Benjamin, and he said it was rude to pry and that I should just leave the poor boy alone, which I agreed with. But then came the night everything went sideways. Benjamin and I were asleep when we woke up to sirens blaring outside. We rushed out, joining the handful of neighbors who had come to see what was going on. Quinn's house was swarming with police cars, an ambulance, the whole 9 yards. We watched as the cops came out of his house with that girl in handcuffs. She didn't struggle or scream. She just accepted what was happening and stared straight ahead with a blank expression. Then we saw Quinn being rushed out on a stretcher. He was a bloody mess, and I gasped at the sight. We didn't see him for a week after that, and I was worried sick. When he finally came back, Benjamin and I walked over to check on him. He let us in without hesitation and told us everything. Apparently, that girl, her name was Ellie, had confessed to everything, which made things easy for the police. For starters, she wasn't supposed to have his house key. She had stolen his spare and made a copy without him knowing. According to him, she had started asking him for things. Fancy dinners, jewelry, expensive trips. When he hesitated, she became possessive and angry. And that's when things started going downhill in their relationship. Every time she had shown up unannounced at his house, he hadn't known. She had access to his location through his phone, which I didn't even know was possible. She had gone through all of his stuff, but worst of all, she had planted hidden cameras in his room. Every time she went back to his house when he wasn't there, she was replacing the camera batteries and making sure they were still working. The argument between them that I overheard was Quinn's attempt at breaking up with her. She refused, and he reluctantly agreed to go on a break. Ellie had seen everything through the cameras, and the next night, she went to his house with a knife. I'm not going to explain the rest. You get the idea. Somehow, Quinn managed to get her to the ground, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctor said he was an inch away from needing surgery or dying. Benjamin and I tried to console him, but he was visibly shaken. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned his lesson about flaunting his money, especially around pretty girls. He moved out not long after. He said he didn't feel safe in that house anymore, and that his ex had tons of friends just like her, and he couldn't stand the thought that they might know where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray to God he's doing okay. No one should ever have to go through something like that, especially not someone as young as him. The neighbor's party. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses are pretty spaced out, which was part of what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer than most of the others. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought it could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and all. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Even though I tried to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to meet my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children, and yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't sure how a younger guy like myself would blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I finally got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from spending the day making small talk with strangers. I knew that if I just went back home, I'd never be as motivated to meet them again. So I sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I'd gotten used to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude with a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade. What a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s among so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about it, that most of the people here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief. He introduced himself as Damon and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Hell, why not right now?" expecting him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning the room, then turned back and said he wished he could, but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work. It just seemed like a normal follow-up question, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said, "Finance," but didn't elaborate, which I thought was strange. I told him fair enough and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he said he lived there alone, which was insane to me given how big the house was. We chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before heading back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived there. He seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind, my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up. But he'd always complain about how busy he was and apologize that we couldn't hang out. Eventually I gave up. Not in a hostile way, just in a you do you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home and my office is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property. If you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits, I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday, I remember that distinctly. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first I thought I was imagining it, or maybe it was part of a dream, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were. 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it. He was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party. That much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the next morning. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked. But to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer. At least 10 pairs. But there was something off. There was literally no one there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room or maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could still hear people over the music playing in the background though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording. A literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake. All of it. But that didn't make sense. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house. That much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down there, except for a faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there. I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door deeper in the basement. I crept toward it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up another noise I hadn't noticed earlier over the music. It sounded mechanical, a heavy rhythmic grinding, like machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing inside, looking across the room at something I couldn't see. They were all older guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes with protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also noticed they had on heavy work boots, even though I'd seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I might have assumed they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but whatever it was lay too far out of view. After a few seconds of just standing there, I started to pick up this awful bleach smell, or some kind of industrial cleaning solution. And that's what did it for me. I suddenly felt this deep pit in my stomach, this overwhelming sense that I was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to move as quietly as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me dimmed, like someone had just shut the door. I didn't actually hear it over the blaring music, but I felt it. I bolted. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could, ran through the house, and burst out the front door. I didn't run straight to my own house. I cut through the yard, jumped my fence, and slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon, or any of those men, know I'd been snooping around. I gathered myself, crept up to my office, and made sure all the lights were off. I crouched below the window and peeked toward Damon's house. At first, nothing. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and about 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street. Damon wasn't among them. I could tell because every one of these men looked older, like the ones I'd seen in the basement. A few of them seemed to be arguing. One even shoved another, and for a second I thought they were about to start fighting in the middle of the street. But they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stayed crouched by the window, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I thought about calling the cops, but what could I even say? The noise was gone, and I hadn't actually seen a crime. What really threw me off was how none of the other neighbors had reacted to the loud music, especially the ones with kids. If I called the police and no one else had heard anything, Damon would know it was me. And those shoes, I couldn't make sense of that either. The men I saw were all wearing boots, so did they bring extra pairs just to leave in the foyer? It didn't make sense. My mind was spinning. I had too many questions and no answers, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to get some work done, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing over at his house every few seconds. After hours of his car still being gone, I decided to take a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to sneak a few glances through his windows. Nothing. Days passed. Damon still didn't return, or at least his car didn't. I was baffled. Each day that went by made it stranger. I couldn't understand how none of my neighbors had heard the noise that night, so I finally asked them. I went to a few houses and straight up asked if they'd heard the party at Damon's a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about. Not even after I told them which house, what time, how loud it was. That's when I started to feel like I was going crazy. That was months ago now. The crazy part is, Damon still hasn't returned. It's obvious no one's been maintaining the place. The grass is knee-high, and there's a pile of unopened packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it's nothing, but I can't shake the feeling that no one would go to such lengths to disguise whatever they were doing with a fake party, unless it was something illegal. But then again, would people like that really forget to lock the front door? Maybe that's what those men were arguing about. I have no idea. And the fact that none of my neighbors seemed bothered by any of this makes me feel like I've stumbled into something much bigger, some kind of conspiracy. I know I sound paranoid, but there are just too many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I can't decide whether I should confront him or pretend I never saw anything at all.